Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good? Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming out. We had some doubts about turnout initially for this event, and I'm glad you have proven us all wrong. This is wonderful to see. When I set up chairs, I was telling someone this is like my hopeful chair setup, and you've done great. I really appreciate it. My name is Katie Worthing. I'm the executive director here at the Yarmouth History Center. Thrilled to see you. This project has really been a year in the making, so it's nice to see it come to reality. So a few acknowledgments before we start our program. Thank you to Sean Quirk, who's here filming this for posterity. So we have a great recording of this on record for future audiences. Thank you to all of our members and supporters who are in the audience here today. Your support helps us put on events like this. And then finally, thank you to these two here, Allan Wilson and Rick Wile, who have really guided and shaped this program over the past year and a half, 2 years, maybe? It's been a long time. And it's really their curiosity about this era of Yarmouth history, even their curiosity about their own kind of experiences and preconceptions, really drove the creation of this event. And their connections to all of you really helped make it a reality, too. All right, so I'd like to start our conversation. This is collaborative, interactive, conversational. So if you have questions during the presentation, if you want to add something, please do. I definitely encourage you to do that. But first, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us your name, maybe where you grew up, what school you attended, and like a fun fact about yourself that relates to Yarmouth, maybe. So I'm going to pass it to Allan here first to start.
My name is Allan Wilson. I grew up in Yarmouth at 103 Main Street. My dad was a real estate agent and a collector of certain antique items. He often got antiques mixed up with junk. So he sold whatever he could sell. I went to Springfield College, and after that I went to UMass Amherst. And my professional career has been involved in coaching athletic teams at the University of Hartford and Ricker College, which is no longer in existence in Holton, Maine. And then I went into a career with nonprofits, and I worked at a number of nonprofits, including Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Camp. And I was there when he first formed it, and it was a real privilege to be a part of that, and also an autistic school in Brewster, New York. And then the last professional job was executive director of an educational diversity program located in Farmington in Hartford, Connecticut. And I've known this gentleman here to my left for a lot of years.
Thank you, Allan. I'm Rick Wile. I've dropped the Y from the last of my name. Only Sharon Sharp, I think, still calls me Ricky, for which I forgive her, but that's all right. I grew up on Bridge Street in Yarmouth. My parents grew up in Yarmouth. I had one teacher in grade school who taught my grandmother, both parents, and myself, to talk about an era. And I also graduated North Yarmouth Academy, class of 61. Went on to do a bunch of other things, but I think I'm probably best known these days. I was Katie's English teacher at Brunswick High School.
I'm Barbara Peasley, but anybody that knows me, I'm Cokie Burnham. And I grew up in Yarmouth. I was class of 53 at the Academy. We lived on East Elm Street, just up the block when we first moved to Yarmouth back in 1939. And I'm older than all these guys, by the way.
And better.
And then lived most of our life down on, well, actually part of it on Main Street across from Earl Pride's IGA, where I used to stock shelves for 25 cents an hour. And then we moved back down to 11 Pleasant Street, where we'd been before the war. We went to Oberlin during the war because Dad had a job in Cleveland. Back to Yarmouth. We've sort of moved around a little bit. But the fun things about Yarmouth is it just was such a community then. We used to have plays in third grade, and we'd dress up as bluebirds and windmills, and we had Hopi Indian houses and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know too many schools that do that anymore. I left NYA, went to Syracuse, left Syracuse, I don't know where I've been, but I've worked as packaging manager for Williams-Sonoma. I've been an industrial engineer for LL Bean. I was LL Bean's first corporate trainer because my college degree said I was a high school English teacher. So I've just been all over the place. And the reason I'm Barbara Peasley is that I married Dick Peasley when I was who I met in California. And when I went to the big anniversary reunion at the class of, 59, where my brother Mike was a member, I told them my name was Barbara Peasley, but I said, well, it's Barbara Cokie Burnham Peasley, because nobody knew who in the devil Barbara Peasley was, and they still don't. But, and that's fine, because neither do I. I've always been Cokie Burnham in my mind, so there you go. But this is really fun. I run into people. My mind doesn't remember events, but I do remember issues. Like I used to have a class with Coach Hawks. We left on the bus at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and went to Crystal Lake for swimming lessons. One of my students here, one of my students there. And it was really fun. Coach Hawks was a genius. But I'm really glad to be here. I got a million other things I can yak on about, but this isn't my show, so on we go, Joe.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Joe Saunders. Grew up at 168 Main Street in Yarmouth. I don't know what it's called now. They've changed the numbers. So.
Main Street.
But still Main Street. Still Main Street. Went to NYA, graduated in '59, barely. And finally wound up in the hardware business. Worked for Tommy Payson of Yarmouth Hardware for quite a while, and then finally purchased a store in Freeport called Saunders Hardware. And so that's that. I'll expand more later if you're interested.
Hi, I'm Ted Sharp. First thing that came to my mind, with a few exceptions, is we can say anything we want because of this audience. Nobody remembers exactly what really happened. And so you may accuse us of making up something, but you're probably doing the same thing as you respond to us. I graduated in 1960. My parents lived at 21 South Street. They came here during World War II from Philadelphia, which Philadelphia, Yarmouth in that era was, as my father said, one hell of a transformation. And I didn't know any better. I was 2.5. I didn't have a vote. But after NYA, spent my career in education. I married my high school sweetheart, Sharon Libby Sharp, who is sitting back here next to Bunny Mulvaney, to me, Bunny Osgood. And we've raised 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I think we'd both say that's the highlight of our life, to have those people in our family. Had the good fortune in my professional career to do a lot of different things. I've been headmasters of school in international settings, the most recent in Beijing, private schools, public schools, and found that to be a lot of fun. Had the privilege of serving on Bill Bennett's staff when he was Secretary of Education in the Reagan administration. And I guess that's enough. And I was on the board for a long time with Allie Bornheimer, who's in the back row, at North Yarmouth Academy. And both Allie and I, older than me. Yeah, 6 months and wiser. But we both felt that we got as Sharon does, got a great education at North Yarmouth Academy, and it was a way for us to give back to the Academy, and we continue to do that. So that's probably enough. I will say, right now we have grandchildren are 20, 21, 22, and 19, and then a 4-year-old, who Sharon and I have had for 24 hours. So if either one of us fall asleep during this, it's not because we're bored. Kenna.
I'm Kenna Cleve Small. I was born and raised in Yarmouth, grew up on High Street. My mother worked at the grocery stores, various grocery stores on the Main Street. And my dad worked at the greenhouse, Baston's Greenhouse Florist on High Street for 37 years. Let's see, I know most of these people. I'm related to Rick Wile. His mother was my cousin. And Joe Saunders, I spent most of my time at their house growing up, or Sally spent her time over at my house. We used to play croquet on Bunny Mulvaney's lawn most summers, in the summertime. I graduated from NYA in 1962, went to nursing school at Mary Hitchcock in Hanover, New Hampshire. Came back to Maine Medical Center, worked there for a year, then went in the Navy, was stationed at Camp Pendleton in California for 2 years. Got there, was there for 1 week, acquired a horse and a dog, and worked for the next 2 years. Came back to Yarmouth, went to work at Maine Medical Center, and retired after 50 years in nursing. Still do volunteer time there. Still have, well, now it's one big mule and 2 donkeys that I rescued from Lafayette Street because I worked with their owner and she was moving away. So I wanted my horses and my dogs, and I've still got them, and nothing's changed at our house.
All right, thank you all for those introductions. When we first conceived of this event, we were really thinking about it being an examination of the years 1955 to 1962, when a lot of things were happening in Yarmouth. And one of those things was the decision to build a new public high school. So my first question is going to be really, what was it like to be in Yarmouth, to be a student in Yarmouth at the time when the town was wrestling with that question of whether to establish a new public high school? Anyone want to take that first?
I can't answer that. I wasn't around when that was happening.
All right. Yeah, Kenna, I'll hand this down to you.
Probably our class got impacted more by this than any other class because our class got split in half. Exactly in half. And half graduated from the high school, half graduated from the academy. We had a choice. I got a work scholarship to stay at the academy. It cost $100 for a year to go to school there. Not so nowadays. And I found out later on that the other half of my class that went to the high school really struggled because they felt that they sort of had a bad attitude and that they didn't need to waste a whole lot of time trying to change their mind. They should have kept our class together and let it all graduate.
I'll take it. Anybody else? Yep. Being in the class of 60, as Kenneth said, it was less of an impact. In fact, and I say this with great respect because I know it affected a lot of people, but at least in my class, and it was never an issue. And I don't remember lengthy discussions in the town of Yarmouth about whether people should be at NYA or whether the town should build a high school. I know there were some, but you know, when you're 17 years old, it's probably not the thing that's on your plate. It may have been for some of the adults in the community and therefore their kids if they were going to be impacted. And I know there was some disenchantment, I think, in town with the academy, and I guess my response to that was, having led 3 private schools, is that private schools are private schools. They make their own decisions. And they can be a partner with a town, but it's their decision, their board of trustees, to decide what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And so I wouldn't have taken offense to the fact that if the town wanted NYA to do something and they felt it was in their best interest not to do it, fine. The town had a choice, and they made a good choice, I think, to build what's become one of the finest public high schools in the state of Maine. So anyway, but it just shows, I think, too, the difference of perhaps if our class had been split up like that, we would have felt differently.
I've got one. I remember getting a letter asking, did I want to become a member of Yarmouth High School or continue to be a graduate of North Yarmouth Academy? Needless to say, I was incensed because the academy, that was my high school life, and we had so much fun at the academy, and I really thought, how can I tell people I graduated from Yarmouth High School when it wasn't even there? So...
oh, don't let that stand in your way. I said, don't let that stand in your way.
Oh, well, not much ever has, but however, plus my mom was very involved with the academy, and she became the archivist there, and my mom was Winnie Burnham, in case anybody doesn't remember who she was. So the academy was where we wanted to be. Yarmouth High School is doing very, very well, and I applaud that. But I'm still a graduate of the academy.
One of the benefits of doing this program with Katie and Allan is it's helped me sort of reconcile my feelings towards the academy. I did not have very good feelings about the academy when we left. My feeling was that during especially our senior year, when it was very clear that we were going to be a private school, we had this sort of schizophrenic, first of all, we had a sort of a schizophrenic basketball schedule where we were still part of the Triple C, and we would play those games on Friday, but on Tuesdays we'd go to Freiburg and we'd go to Kent's Hill and so forth. We were supposed to, guys were supposed to wear coats and ties. As a 17-year-old, 18-year-old who worshipped at the feet of Jack Kerouac and all the beatniks, I fought that tooth and nail. I got some of my brother's bow ties, little tiny ones, and I clipped them on T-shirts, and did everything I could do to sort of rebel against that. And I felt a tremendous amount of pressure, and that may or may not have been true, as I said. Looking at it now back, reading what was going on at the time, I can certainly understand why the Academy was doing what the Academy was doing. They were doing what they had to do. And of course, as somebody said, at 18 years old, I had no idea that this. All I knew was they were infringing on my rights. But I've carried that with me. And so this has been sort of healing for me to look at the Academy. I was one of those who put my name to the high school. When they said, do you want to be an alumni? I said, I am an alumni of the town's high school. And for me, that was the high school, even though I didn't go to it. Would I do it again? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I had this thing, and I admit it, and that's the mark that was going on. That was some of the things that affected some of my class.
Yes, sir.
For those of us who weren't in Yarmouth at the time, do I take it that all Yarmouth students went to NYA?
That's right.
For high school.
For high school,
Yeah.
So it was an open school.
It took tuition. The town paid tuition.
Paid tuition. Okay.
You could go somewhere else if you preferred. So, some of my classmates went to Portland.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Prudy Jensen went to Portland.
And a couple went to Cumberland.
Yeah.
But you had that option if you didn't want to go to the
And there were
academy.
kids from other towns who also paid tuition to NYA. Yeah.
My situation was much like Ted's. Does somebody else have a question? Oh, okay.
Why did they do the high school to begin with? Were they running out of space at NYA, and the students were getting more and more students? They needed to have a bigger school, or what was the reason for?
Well, I think that there were a lot of issues. I think one, even though there were some Yarmouth citizens serving on the board of NYA, they weren't exclusively from Yarmouth, which would be true of any independent school. And there was some sense that it was time for the academy to construct a larger gym. At that time, NYA wasn't both interested and probably financially viable to do something like that. Today, the academy's thriving, as many of you know, but not then. And it was still debating what it was, to the point Ricky made. So I think it was just a confluence of that circumstance that led people to think maybe it's better for the school, for the town of Yarmouth, to have its own schools and to have the control that public schools have.
One of the things that we found, and the Historical Society has it, is their town report from Yarmouth, from the Yarmouth schools, making the recommendation that they build a high school. And this was in 1959. And if you're really interested, it's fascinating reading. It is the town's side of things. There's a little, and there's also a letter from the academy explaining why they did it. They don't quite jibe, which is interesting. But I think basically, if I had to say, it's right. The Yarmouth was getting bigger, and there were all these classes coming through, and the academy, in my opinion, made the decision that we cannot afford, if we're going to continue the education that we're giving, we cannot afford these other things like a gymnasium. For a while it was because Yarmouth wanted a bigger gymnasium, but it was more than that. I think it had to do with the growth of the town.
If there's a book called Old New England Academies, and some of you may have, and it's the story of the transition of many New England academies where kids in that town went by tuition. And most of them, in fact all but 3 in Maine, eventually evolved into the building of a public school, high school. And so it's not that Yarmouth and NYA were probably operating any different than most towns were.
I'm just going to add just a follow-up with where I came from. When it was going on, and actually I'm going to say 60 and 1961, I wasn't involved in the decision-making process. I knew very little about it. I was where Ted was. I was involved with all kinds of different things at NYA. We had a basketball team that most people thought was better than awful. So we did fairly well, and it got to be a very interesting following as we went through the tournament. But what I found in doing the research for this, that there was an incredible amount of community involvement in the decision to actually make the decision to go and to build a high school. And if you really want to do it, I found it on the Portland Press Herald back in 60, 61, all the articles, and there weren't that many, by the way, but you have to really look. But when you find that, there was a lot of community input into the decision-making process. I can remember coming home after we found out the decision was made to build a high school, and my dad says to me, "Boy, that's interesting. Nobody has any money in this town." So it was very, as you read into it, what you find out is that the people who pulled it together and did it was a very courageous decision. It was new, it was different, it was 60, 61, 59. And the thing that was shocking to me is how much money they had to raise to build a high school. And you could go on. And the other thing what happened is that the town really got behind it, and people started making donations of books to the people that were on the school committee. So there were people coming forward and giving 5, 6, and all they wanted to do was start the library. All they wanted to do was start the library, and they collected a lot of books. And then finally, the whole idea of paying for it became a moot point. We've got books, why can't we have a school? Concept. So the thing that stuck in my mind is they built the high school, and you can check this out, for $946,000. The whole high school. All right. And I can still remember some of the members of the school committee, and Richard Boyd, who lived on this street for many years, and his son, Bobby Boyd, played on the same baseball team that I played on for many years and had a tragic death in Vietnam. But at the same token, it was that group of people that really made that critical, courageous decision. And then, frankly, the giving of books kicked it off to the point where they felt comfortable making the financial commitment to do it. And the town really rallied around that. And to me, that was just a turning point. That was a huge turning point. You know, you can't do anything without the community support and without the community involvement and the community saying, we want you to do this. And thank God it was, because now we have two great educational institutions in the same town, North Yarmouth Academy and Yarmouth High School. Allan, USA.
Allan Bornheimer. There was a little bit of friction underlying all of this. I'm very proud of going to North Yarmouth Academy. I loved it, and I'm proud to have served 2 tours of duty as a trustee of North Yarmouth Academy. However, my father, Millard Bornheimer, was on the school committee in town. He was chairman of the school committee for a while, and he had to deal with North Yarmouth Academy. And unlike Ted, my father wouldn't agree that the academy was free to do whatever they wanted. The first thing they did that made him angry, they went and hired a new basketball coach without consulting with him or the school committee. and I remember overhearing my father tell my mother, he would be happy to hear this. He said, with the exception of Frank Knight and Bob Hudson, the rest of those North Yarmouth Academy trustees are a bunch of stuffed shirts. My father would say it again to us.
It's an interesting point, because in the independent school world, the Board of Trustees only hires one person, the head of school. The head of school hires everyone else. And in the public sector, the school committee has to sign off if you hire a janitor. So it's a very different perspective, those two worlds.
You asked about the effect of the students, and I was one of the members. There are several of us here in the audience. We went from freshman to senior at Yarmouth High School, so the effect was huge on us. Yeah. If we had stayed at the academy, I could have walked to school, but no. So it was a huge effect on us, and we loved it. The new building was really awesome.
Could you say a little bit more about establishing the culture there at Yarmouth High School, like starting fresh, what was that like? I'm going to give you the mic here.
You are Kennan, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Oh, Suki, yeah.
So here's Penny's flipping.
Oh, bless your heart. Bless your heart. Yeah, I'm Kennan Payson, and my father had the hardware store on Main Street, which is the answer to number 23, in case you're interested. Anyway, we were talking on the way over here. We remember going and choosing the colors. Were they going to be? What were the colors going to be for the school? And we remember naming the mascot, which was the Clipper. And we did a lot of those things, which I'm sure we didn't understand. We were 13, 14 years old. What did we know? But we, and then going in, I did a couple of things that probably I shouldn't have. But we went into this brand new building, which still smelled of new paint and new linoleum and all that stuff. And our principal, Dan Center, decided that this was his property and we were not to mess about with it. Well, we did. And so anyway, that was the kind of culture that we were going into. We were starting a whole brand new institution, and we did it.
And that was really one of my other questions, was who chose the first mascot? So thank you for answering that before I even could ask it. Any other comments or, yeah, sure.
What was the competitive nature between the teams at the beginning? when there was a high school baseball team, basketball team, and NYA had one. Was that competitive? And today, I don't even know whether it's terribly competitive anymore.
Well, Yarmouth High School obviously plays in a public school arena. I don't mean arena by, but public school league, and NYA does as well, except for its hockey team, which plays in the Greater Boston Hockey League. That's the big sport at North Yarmouth Academy. So probably in the beginning there might have been some, two of the best athletes, Bobby Boyd went to Yarmouth High School, and Bill, help me guys, Dugan stayed at NYA, interestingly enough, the two stalwarts. And
Bobby Boyd went to the high school.
That's what I said.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I just gave the award for Bobby. So anyway, I think not a lot. Actually, the history of the two schools is that they've gotten along really well. In my tenure on the board, and Allie served 2 terms, he was there earlier, I don't ever remember a discussion at the board level about any tensions between the Yarmouth Public Schools and NYA. I think they've both respected one another. On occasion, if one needs it, they'll share their feels, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really quite remarkable, a testament to everybody that was involved.
Great, thank you. And these are great questions from the audience. Comments, everything is really welcome. So thank you for participating in that. Just to change the subject a bit, another big event that happened during this era in Yarmouth history was the construction of the Cousins Island Bridge. So I wondered if any of our panelists had thoughts about, how did that change the way the town interacted with the island? Did it change your social life? How did it affect day-to-day life? Maybe I'll start with Ted.
No, I'm only laughing because it gave us direct access to one of the best parking spots. So we think it was a wonderful idea. And, we told you might open Pandora's box. But in all seriousness, it was quite an event, obviously, because the Wyman station was really what drove all of that, the power station, which today only is online a minuscule amount of hours in a year's time. And therefore, it probably was a boon to the real estate market. I'm looking at Buzzy and Judy had a house out there. And what era was that, Buzz?
Oh, you're asking questions. You want me to remember something?
Yeah.
We moved there in 1975.
Yeah.
Lived there until '89. Moved to Princess Point.
Yeah. So it's really developed the island. But it seems to me, and somebody may know something I don't, that it was more a cohesive move in the longer term than it was disruptive.
Well, one thing, I believe that Central Maine Power paid about 2/3 of the budget. So we like that a lot.
One thing, I was not here. I was, I can't remember where I was, but I was livid, of course, because they were going to put a power station out there. And it turns out one really good thing came of that. They used all those old rubber tires that they threw in the bay, and they became the home for baby lobsters to survive. So I said, okay, Wyman Power Station. But that's the only positive I ever saw. But I'm glad they're not online much.
I think what I thought of when I saw this question was not only what a wonderful parking place it was, but also not only did it connect us to Cousins Island, it connected us to Little John's Island. Mm-hmm. And that was when there were a bunch of kids from Massachusetts schools who summered on Little John's. And that was my first experience with kids from the city. And they were cool. I mean, they had cool nicknames. They had cars. They were. This is something that really opened my eyes to a bigger part of the world. So so I still remember going over the narrow little bridge from Cousins Island to Little John at speeds exceeding what would be common sense. So that was part of my rebellious years, I think.
My recollection of that whole period is directly a reflection to who my dad was. My dad was a real estate agent, and he loved it. So there were many discussions in our family internally, which I was not a part of, but I overheard, about what to do. I mean, encouraging him to do more with Cousins Island, to actually buy some lots and to help develop it and all those things. But at the end of the day, it was, in our household, it was a terrific thing. And turns out it not only helped the economy, but it was a great parking spot.
Well, Little John's became party central to Rick's point. Yeah.
Okay, lots of things here. I'm going to pass this mic around so that we can get some more comments.
My maiden name was Diane Andren, and my dad, once the bridge went in, I remember him counting out silver dollars, 50 silver dollars for a lot of land over there, and he bought 2 lots. I'm the class, Yarmouth High School, 1964.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Haskell, and I did not graduate either from NYA or Yarmouth High School, because we left town as I entered Bangor High School, much to my chagrin, but that's where I ended up. I would have been in the class of 63 if I'd stayed and my family had stayed. My father was the loan officer and manager of Canal National Bank, which is now a Key Bank, and we lived out on Greeley Road, and he traveled into the bank and we traveled into the gray schoolhouses. We also had a camp down in White's Cove, which now we couldn't afford to even walk on the street. But it was one of the ones that, of course, was torn down when the bigger homes were built. I think my dad sold that land for $3,500 at the time in 1959 when we left town. But from a young person's perspective, I was 13 when we left and moved to Bangor. We were in that cottage that summer. They were building the bridge, I think 58, 57, somewhere in there. And the pile drivers all summer long in building that bridge, and it would just drive us crazy because you couldn't get away from it. But we loved Cousins Island. For a time, it was all ours. We'd get in our boat, go across to the sandbar, chase one of the horseshoe crabs with hundreds of them, and they, of course, disappeared. And we could hike up into the island when there was really just marked trails. We had a friend who had a little cabin there with no electricity, gas lights, and we would hike up to their place and really feel like we were wilderness. So it was an event, as I remember, that was exciting because this bridge was going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it has. And when I came back, when I left Yarmouth and we moved to Bangor, I had come back for summers and worked on the Blanchard farms out on Greeley Road right up through my junior year in college. And so I was coming back in the area those years. But Yarmouth and the environs have always been dear to my heart. And you grow up there, it has to be, right? Who's next?
So since we were given a trivia question, I have a trivia question for the group up here. Can you tell me the name of that bridge and why it is named that way?
Is it? Snodgrass.
Hey. You on the board? You're not on the board?
It's the Snodgrass Bridge, the LSC Snodgrass Bridge. Yeah. And the C stands for Christmas. And if you come to our trivia night, this might be a good fact to know. Just saying. But any other comments on the bridge? Yeah.
If you listen to WYAR, you hear them say that at the far end of the Snodgrass Bridge.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because that's how the only reason I know.
I lived in Yarmouth all my life, and I didn't know that. When Wyman Station opened, they brought a whole bunch of families, obviously, into Yarmouth, and a lot of them ended up in our classes. So we because of the way we were in Yarmouth, we could tell you who were the CMP kids and who were the Yarmouth kids.
I just had a question about, with the bridge coming in and the talk about the cost of the high school, and Central Maine paid 2/3, half of the town. Okay, how much did CMP allow the high school to be built more easily?
That's a great question. How much do we think the arrival of the bridge and the infusion of money from CMP was kind of enabled the construction of Yarmouth High School a few years later? Anyone? Opinions welcome.
A lot. All right. Yes, I don't think that would have happened with a degree in success without that funding and without that support, both in terms of financial but also in terms of the students that came to here, that went to school. The families obviously added a lot to the community vis-a-vis membership in churches, being involved in different organizations, things like that.
I'll go to Kenna and then I'll come back to you.
Back then, Yarmouth was a very poor town, and almost everybody here that grew up here, their parents worked. We had the pharmacy. We had the local Allan's, the local store where you could go in and eat. We had your father's clothing store and the hardware store. We had the meat market from Payson's. We had Vinings. We had Herman's that came along. And this was back when everybody was walking. Nobody had any money here. Everybody walked. TV was just coming out. They came on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe, and went off at 11. It was black and white. But we used to get up in the morning when I was in high school. We would ride our bicycles down to the bridge and back before school started. But there was no money in Yarmouth. So. Oh, the other thing was, when the academy started with our class, they wanted everybody to go to college. And they pushed really hard for college. They wouldn't even look at trade schools. And they tried really, really hard to get me to go to college instead of going to nursing school. I got a work scholarship at the academy. My parents couldn't afford to pay even $100 to get me to go to nursing, for staying there at the academy. So, everybody was working really hard here.
Well, I think Ken has already mentioned the fact that, we were not a wealthy town at all, and very conservative, I think. One of the things that I think Allan and I both did in preparation for this is to read a lot of the old Yarmouth shopping notes. Yeah. And the editor of that was Ken Larrabee. Right. And Ken Larrabee always wrote a little editorial. And they were very conservative. Let's put it that way. And it was all about how little money we had. Right. And we didn't have money. And he seemed to be opposed to 95 coming through because that was going to bring more people into town and more people. That would make the school budget go up, and we wanted to stay a small town. Right. And so I think there was that mindset, which I think the building of the building of the power station, sort of.
Yeah. My father did not like the fact that people were coming to Yarmouth, and he belonged to a group that was called Kapoom. I don't know if anybody ever remembers this. Keep people out of Maine. And he had a bumper sticker to that effect. Yeah. But talking about Yarmouth and cost, they still don't have town meetings here, do they? Oh, yeah. Do you? Okay. I can remember when I was allowed to go to my first town meeting, one of the major topics of discussion was the Spanish-American bandstand. I don't know how many people here remember that bandstand, but it used to be down in front, across the street from the library. It was a circular bandstand, and it was falling into sad disrepair. And one of the topics of discussion at the town meeting was how can we get rid of it because it's an eyesore and it's going to cost a lot of money. You're going to have to hire somebody to come in and take it apart piece by piece. Whereupon Mrs. Orland Blake, Mary Estelle's mother, raised her hand and stood up and she said, "I'll give you the $2 you can buy dynamite and blow the damn thing up." So that's Yarmouth. She did.
That's great. So kind of coming back to something that Rick mentioned is the arrival of 95 or 295 as we know it now. Any memories or comments about, when that was coming through?
Well, I don't remember it directly, but I, talking with Dick Kleppencott, who I don't guess he isn't here this evening, there was quite a movement. The people who decided that it was going to come bifurcate, beautiful Yarmouth. And there was quite a movement to try to have it go up through North Yarmouth. And it would, I think, would have made a lot more sense. I mean, when you consider that it came right across it, Alec Mansfield's garage was gone, and it just sort of ruined that part of the harbor, I thought. And it eliminated Grantville. That was one of the issues that my father and some others were interested in, but they did not win.
Can I mention one thing? I can remember my dad going to Augusta, Ken Larrabee, to try to fight against 95.
Okay. Yeah.
And there was something about the fact that we're going to get federal funds for that. So, that's why
for the fight
according to my father. And we were going to destroy Yarmouth because some people wanted a new road for free. Now, I don't know whether that was true or not, but that was something that I'm sure Ted Sharp remembers too.
When they were building the interstate, we lived on High Street in an apartment upstairs, and you had to get off from 295 at exit 15, get onto Route 1, come back and get onto exit 17. They put the bridge in last, but the state police used to use that to play that dead-ended strip down to the river. They go out there and race their cars back and forth. So you can see them. You could see them down there just playing.
Your comment about the state police leads me to a comment about our lone policeman during the era that we all grew up, Lester Graham, who drove a 49 Mercury that on its best days may have gone past 25 miles per hour. And that was speeding. And the joke among all of us was, which end of town is Lester at right now? And we'll raise hell on the other end. Because by the time he gets there, we can go back to some other place. But when you think of that was security. And, one of the nice things is, I guess I want to make sure I do say this. When I talk to many of my friends who grew up at the same time, we have very fond memories of growing up in Yarmouth, Maine in the 50s. It was a wonderful place to grow up. It was safe. It was, throw your glove on your handlebar, put your glove on. Some mom will make you a peanut butter sandwich at noontime, and so forth. And I think you'd find that most of us, even though we're talking about some things that may sound like we're being a bit cynical, I think we all feel blessed to have been in that environment and to go to both good schools, NYA and Yarmouth.
For example, the hurricanes of 1954, Carol and Donna, I was scheduled to go to Syracuse, and the water washed out Pleasant Street Hill. It's now Marina Way or something, and all the way down to the old trolley tracks that used to go in Portland. And it was amazing, but this happened like 3 days before I was supposed to go, and the town brought in 3 yards of gravel and put it in our driveway so my dad could get the car out of the driveway. And that was Yarmouth, in spite of the $2 to blow.
Yeah, I had a question. Listening to you all, it was a very poor town. Yeah. So there were very few swimming pools in the backyards, right?
That changed.
What? Very few. Did you all take advantage of the Royal River?
Good Lord, yes.
Absolutely.
Why have a swimming pool? We had an ocean and a river.
We couldn't take advantage of the Wile River because of the chicken factory.
Well, it did not bother us. You could dodge carcasses, you just had to be alert.
We went right over here, right off the bridge. Cows floating by, no problem.
We had a Tarzan swing that took us right out over the middle of them.
We'd be up there in April swimming.
Sandy told me that I would get polio if I put my toe in the water.
Oh, really?
At the boatyard.
That was if you didn't wait another an hour after you ate your lunch. I'm kidding.
Our swimming pool was the old Yarmouth Town Landing down off Princess Point Road. And then when Cousins Island Bridge went across, then we had a beach down there. But when we were raised, at 5 years old, I broke my arm at Joe Saunders' house. We had the Tarzan swing out over the banking. I'm 5 years old. We used to get turned loose at 5 and needed to be sure we were back home by lunchtime. Every mother in this town raised all of us. Our parents knew where we were and what we'd been doing by the time we got home. We didn't have to tell them. And I broke my arm because I was nearsighted and they wanted me to jump off, and I didn't. I jumped off, rolled down the banking, broke my arm, went home. I'm 5 years old, picked up my cat. It hurt, so I went up and laid down in my bed and went to sleep. My mother came up and she said, "What are you doing in bed?" My arm hurts. It was broken. I mean, we're up there playing, but the whole town, every mother in this town raised all of us.
The downside of that was when I would walk Sharon home after school, somebody would call her mother and say, "I just saw Ted walking Sharon home. You better get home."
I was waiting to Cousins Island.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we had to move at that point.
Talking about mothers taking care of kids, we used to get home from school at 2:30, 2:45. The telephone would ring, and it was Mary Estelle Blake. And she would say, "Cokie, your mother called, and she wants you to turn on the oven at 3:50 at 4 o'clock." And that happened all the time. Everybody knew where everybody was. Mm-hmm. And I remember at one point, my brother Michael, his buddy, removed something without paying from it from Vaughn's drugstore. And Roger Vaughn called my mother and said, "Would you mind bringing Michael up here this afternoon?" And it was taken care of. And I don't think Mike ever went into a store without folding his arms ever again the rest of his life.
Yeah, the phone system was very interesting. It was, most people had party lines, so everyone knew sort of what everyone else was doing. And but it was great at times. You know, you'd call Mary Estelle, and she was on the line, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was the operator.
The operator, yeah. And,
she was also the soprano.
Yeah, and you didn't need a number. All you had to say, you know, I would like to call Wimpy Jones, and she'd put you right through. Anyway, it was wonderful.
Yeah, my story was 4th of July, taking an American flag and holding it over my shoulder. And Earl Pride called my mother and said I was dragging the flag on the ground behind me. The other thing about swimming was we had Crystal Lake. And they would run a bus in the summers.
Right.
Up to swimming lessons on Crystal Lake.
Rain or shine.
Right, where my swimming teacher, who's sitting to my left here, passed me.
Me and Coach Hawks.
Yeah, but I still remember you passed me because I was supposed to swim underwater for a certain amount of time. And I did. The trouble was, instead of going straight, I went this way. And so all of a sudden I ran out of water. And, but I had gone far enough so that you said, okay, we'll give it to her.
If this all stuff is boring, you just raise your hand and say, let's move on. But I didn't know that story about you swimming, Rick, but I do know the story about you planting the squash in the front garden on Pleasant Street for Mr. Bornheimer, and when it came up, he put white caps on them. Well, you should have seen it. And he was so upset because the Memorial Day parade came past that garden. It was the last year that he ever asked Ricky to plant anything in his front market garden. So maybe you did that with your eyes shut or something. I don't know. Other questions on other topics? Buzz, you want this?
I want to put a couple of members of the board, bring them up to date. We moved to Yarmouth in 1947, and my father had a store that was the IGA. And Alvarado named it IG if anyone. So changed it right.
Hold the mic up.
And I saved my money. I was 14 years old. I bought a boat and a motor. Lent it to Mike Burnham and Joe Saunders, who threw it off the boat because it caught on fire.
Right.
And
I remember that.
As I sit here thinking of all the memories I have of Yarmouth, I had a friend, Mike Green. He was at the same club I was in Florida, and we talked about growing up in Yarmouth. Yarmouth, what a wonderful town it was. The parents, what you don't see today, our basketball team, if we won a big game, the parents would get together and give us all pizza. It was just a wonderful place to grow up. And I married my high school sweetheart. We've been married 65 years.
What does everybody think of the new Yarmouth? BMWs and Volvos and this and that and big houses and no one talks to each other.
Anyone want to dare take that on?
When you ask a question like that, you ask people for opinions. All right, so I'm going to give you an opinion. I live in an area of the country that a lot of people visit every year from all over the world, Cape Cod. All right, and one of the key issues is affordability for housing. And we have people that go way back to the Kennedy family, the Carey family, that built these palatial estates in 1930, 1940, 1950. All of those things are all done. And then all of a sudden, somebody decided, oh my God, this place is a pretty nice place. I want to buy a place I'm going to build, all right? So what happened was a lot of people found it. We've been living there since 2004. And, you know, it was both my wife and I were teachers, and we put nickels and dimes together to buy a place, and then it all worked out. But as time went on, we could see that there was a real major focus on just the bigger is better concept. And there really has been in the last 4 years a backlash to that. So there's really a major effort to increase diversity and to build homes that are affordable. And we have one going up, a bunch of condos going right up beside our home. And what they instituted is what they call a 40B project in Massachusetts, which they go through and anybody could qualify for a home. And regardless, as long as you had a good job, you had licenses, and you wouldn't committed fraud, and you don't have a license, and you put your name into a selection process. And when the 40Bs came up all across the state, they did a random selection, and they would pick someone to buy the house. And the houses on the Cape the average price of the house in the Cape right now is $750,000 per. But people in the 40B could buy a house for $240,000, $220,000, all right? And the expenses of the difference was covered by taxpayers' dollars. So lo and behold, that's worked, all right? And so about 4 months ago, we live in an area, and next door to us was a family moved in, and they moved into the house. Guess where they were from? Bulgaria. So that, and they've been in the country, they've been working really hard, both of them had jobs. He worked in a pizza factory, and they really had saved and scrunched to get to $220,000. They have 3 young people. They're delightful, they're hardworking, they love America, they think it's the best thing in the world. So my opinion is, work on diversity, work on having a place where people can share equally. And it hits me now because of what's happening in America. And we have to really work hard to be together and help each other and all kinds of things. That's the real reason why I'm here. And when you do the research and when you do all of the things about it, that's the thing that sticks out about this town, is that people work together and they try to help each other out regardless of their financial situation, whether they were Baptist, whether they were Congregationalist, whether they were Catholic. And that is, in my opinion, huge. So that's my opinion.
So we're just coming up to kind of our hour time frame here. So I want to kind of close with another question, maybe bring it back to the fun things you did in the late 50s and early 60s. We've heard about the parking places, but what about, restaurants, movie theaters? What else was fun in town?
The Clam Festival, way back when it wasn't, we used to have, there was a dance, a bean supper, a minstrel show, the Fireman's Field Day, and they actually had dances at the old Masonic Hall where people actually did the two-step and danced. And that was so much fun because everybody in town that wanted to was in the minstrel shows. And then we had Fireman's Field Day. And I can't remember the year that they started bringing in the Ferris wheels and all of that stuff. But it was more fun the other way, I thought, because it was just the people in town getting together and having a good time, and a few friends and family would come from other places, but it wasn't the nightmare that the Clam Festival is. I'm speaking because I'm older than most everybody here, but I don't come to the Clam Festival I'd go to California rather than having to come here to that. But it used to be a lot of fun with the shows that we had, and everybody was in it.
I have to tell you, it was my dad, Tom Payson, who decided that we ought to have a clam festival. And it was my dad, Tom Payson, who decided we should have a bike race during the clam festival on Sunday. And so I love the clam festival. I will not come over and talk to the face.
Well, that was, when it first started, it was fine.
It was Village Improvement Days.
Right, yeah. Well, of course,
McKinnon,
my
you were
mother
a
was
registered
very active in
referee
that.
for those bike races, and
Oh,
don't
yeah.
you go all over the state and referee things? And
I
it was
went
all
all
because
over
of
the
Tom Payson.
Oh, not because of Tom Payson. Tom Payson had the bike race because of Kinnan.
Because of
Kinnan Payson.
Oh, Kinnan.
Yes, yes. Just to set the record straight.
Tom Payson was a go-getter. He was a sweetheart.
He was
guy.
wonderful.
He really was.
Yes.
And so was your mother, by the way. She helped me make suits.
Lawsuits?
No, clothing suits.
I'm curious about what the population was when, as compared to today, like in the mid-late 50s, early 60s. So, less than half. Yeah.
Now, the movie theater was before the
Yes.
hardware store.
Yes, yeah.
We used to go Saturday to the movies.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Any other last, comments or anecdotes about fun things in Yarmouth?
Well, you've already mentioned the movie theater, Carlton's movie theater. The Saturday afternoon serials,
yeah,
which were always great fun. And then when I graduated, when I got to be in, I think in the 8th grade, my parents let me go Friday nights.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal, to go Friday night. And then when we were in high school, they built the drive-in.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a hotbed of
another parking place.
I learned a lot, some of which I remember. And so those are two of those. Those are two places that were big.
Where was the drive-in?
Where was the drive-in? It's about where Hannaford is, just approximately there. And the other thing, when I was growing up, before then, one of my favorite places in the world was what we call the Black Ash.
Oh, yeah.
Which was before, it's where the post office is and everything else like that. That was a magic wonderland.
It was.
And I got spanked every time because I was not allowed there because this was sulfuric acid on steroids, and they had these big wells that you could play in. I thought it was wonderful, and I would try and wash in the river so that I could sneak into the house, never realizing that the dirt was on my socks, not on my feet. So I go home and would get paddled again. But that was a great place.
Yeah, we used to shoot 22s over there.
Yeah.
Mike did it.
Just one last comment about the drive-in. The nickname for the drive-in was the Passion Pit, and probably it was every drive-in in America. Anyway, Sharon's dad would never let her go. And so years later, we were married, and we went to the drive-in one night. She said, well, I sat here waiting and waiting. What's supposed to happen here? And I said, well, we're both about 10 years too late for all of that.
I would have loved to have watched some of you grow up.
I just want to, the thing that I remembered, and it has a lot to do with why we're sitting in this room and talking about this, is I played baseball, and so did Rick, so did Ted, so did Bob Boyd, and we were all hanging around together and playing. And we had a gentleman in town, and some of you may know this or heard of Charlie Turner. Well, he was my favorite guy because, one, I always got a lollipop no matter what. And in the back of his car, which was a car that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but he was our baseball coach. All right, and he used to have eggs you know, and he would you go around his car, and he worked as like a part-time mail carrier, but he loved baseball. And he became our baseball coach because he's the only one that had baseballs. So he would have a bunch of baseballs, he had the lollipops, and he would have the eggs in the back of his car. And I played Pony League, and I played all kinds of, he had the Yarmouth County team. I don't know if there's a Yarmouth County team today, but back then, we would play teams from other parts of the state of Maine, all right? And he would pile us in his car and a couple other cars, and we would go and play. We went up to Cherryfield, Maine, and played Carlton Willie. We went to South Paris, Maine. And I was in college, and if you put two nickels together to make a dime, I was rich in those days. And so he was just the savior for me anyways, to get used to and meeting people from all of the parts of the state. And meanwhile, they came to us. So during the summer, starting in the summer, we would play every weekend. We would play, and it was Charlie Turner with his eggs, his lollipops, and our coach. Don't ask me what he knew about baseball, but he was just the friendliest guy.
Yeah. I've got to say, my sister, Ann, was one of the first umpires, the women umpires that they allowed in this evening games. And she had a horrible time getting started. But, boy, she was tough as nails. And she finally got accepted as the umpire. But those were fun games.
Oh, they're fun.
Yeah.
You know, I think the young men who grew up in Yarmouth in my time have to remember Saturdays probably every week, or well, every other week or every 3 weeks, going to Snap Moxie's barbershop, where he had a table as big as we were and bigger, loaded with comic books. We'd give him 50 cents, and he'd surreptitiously hand us back a nickel that we could spend at his penny candy table. And from when we were the littlest, he'd have to put a board across the arms of his barber seat so we could sit up high enough. We all got butch cuts, and he waxed up the front with that good-smelling hair wax. And it was just a great place to socialize with your age group and let this very fine gentleman, and I guess he cut hair right up into his late 80s or 90s. He was really, really a beloved person in this community, at least as far as I know.
7-cent ice cream cones. And he always gave you a whole scoop and then a little scoop on the top of it. Yep. Yep.
10 cents, you got 2 scoops.
Yeah. And he had a pool table.
I hope none of you ever looked at the water he kept his scoop in. Because I did.
We're all still here.
Well, on that note, I think maybe we'll wrap up our conversation sort of reluctantly. I want to thank all of our panelists for participating and sharing these wonderful stories and memories. And thank you to everyone who came to support this event and added your comments and thoughts. That was really wonderful. Please feel free to stick around, chat with each other, visit. I know there's a lot of folks who haven't seen each other in a long time, and we'd love to have that kind of conversation continue.
Can I make a quick sure. Yeah, I want to put in a plug for the Yarmouth Historical Society, who has been absolutely fantastic in helping us with this. And should you wish, I'm sure they would be delighted to have a donation. And also, I think I can say this, if you've got some memories, if you've got material, I mean, one of the things I've done is I'm aware that I have had boxes and boxes of newspaper clippings and everything else like that nobody gives a damn about, except possibly the Historical Society. So, which is now you now have them. And so if you've got any material from growing up, I know they would like it. I know they like to do interviews. And so this would be a good way to get involved with Yarmouth before people forget. And I think that's one of the reasons Allan and I wanted to do this. Before people forget what it was like, we have a record of it. So I wish you did that.
But I just wanted to say, if anybody noticed, on Saturday's New York Times is a write-up on Penny Payson, Jim's sister, and how amazing she was as a doula. And I'm donating it to the Yarmouth Historical Society.
I just want to echo what Rick said, and also to say how fortunate you are to have Katie here as your executive director, and I hope throughout the years and things going forward that you continue to support all the things she's doing and all the things she's trying to do. One of our goals that we talked about is eventually have an exhibit of the years and the things that we have, and Rick brought up bringing artifacts, articles, pictures. We'd like to encourage that so we can eventually, maybe next year at the same time, have an exhibit of all the things that have happened at Yarmouth during those period of time.
Well, thank you all again. For more information about the Yarmouth History Center, please visit www.yarmouthmehistory.org or visit us at the History Center. We're at 118 East Elm Street in Yarmouth, and we're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 until 4.
Thank you.